Imagine sitting on a massive powder keg, while the people in charge hand you a lit match and tell you it is just a harmless sparkler. Right now, global energy routes are under siege. Domestic politics are boiling over, and the official story is that everything is completely fine. Hello, this is Warm Insight. Today, we are going to talk about navigating the hidden chaos of global markets and protecting your wealth from systemic risks. Leaving a like and subscribing is a huge help to us. Imagine a complex machine like a giant, finely tuned clockwork. Some of these gears represent global geopolitics and the movement of oil around the world. Other gears represent domestic policy and the decisions made by politicians in Washington. Right now, several of these critical gears are grinding violently against each other. Sparks are flying. Some gears are even breaking off completely. But the chief mechanic standing in front of the machine is smiling and trying to convince everyone that the machine is running perfectly. Smart investors are not just watching the hands of the clock to see what time it is. They are inspecting the broken gears. They understand that the whole mechanism could seize up if those broken pieces are not addressed. Let us look at the biggest gear grinding right now, which is the Middle East and specifically the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow stretch of water between Oman and Iran. It is incredibly small. At its narrowest point, it is only 21 miles wide. But through this tiny waterway moves about 20% of all the oil consumed in the entire world every single day. Think of it like a giant garden hose that waters the entire global economy. If someone steps on that hose, the water stops and the plants die. Right now, there is an ongoing conflict involving Iran, and the safety of this strait is completely compromised. Missiles are flying and ships are being targeted. The White House recently announced something called Project Freedom. This is a massive military initiative designed to forcefully reopen the strait and protect shipping lanes. But experts are highly skeptical. Trying to force open a narrow waterway in the middle of an active war zone is incredibly dangerous. We have seen exactly what happens when superpowers try this in the past. Back in the 1980s, during the Iran and Iraq War, both sides started bombing oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. It was called the Tanker War. The United States launched a massive naval operation called Operation Earnest, willed to escort commercial ships. It was the largest naval convoy operation since World War II. The U.S. military sent massive warships to protect the oil. But even with all that military might, things went terribly wrong. A massive American warship called the USS Samuel B. Roberts struck an underwater mine and was nearly blown in half. It took extraordinary effort just to keep the ship from sinking. This historical event proves a vital point. You cannot simply wave a magic wand or send in a few ships and instantly secure a hostile waterway. The ocean is vast and asymmetric warfare, where small, cheap weapons can destroy massive, expensive ships. Makes absolute control nearly impossible. So when the government announces Project Freedom and claims the problem is solved, sophisticated investors know that the reality on the ground is much more complicated. This brings us to a massive disconnect between what we are being told and what is actually happening. The White House is desperately trying to push a narrative that the war is essentially over. But you only have to look at the prices of basic commodities to see the truth. The price of Brent crude oil has surged to over $95 a barrel. Energy prices do not lie. When the price of oil goes up, it acts like a hidden tax on the entire global economy. Every single product you buy has to be transported, usually by a truck or a ship that burns fuel. When fuel gets expensive, everything gets expensive. But it is not just oil. Vice President Vance recently had to publicly acknowledge the rising costs of energy and fertilizers. Why does fertilizer matter so much? This is where we need to understand a miraculous piece of science called the Haber-Bosch process. Invented over a century ago, this process pulls nitrogen out of the air and turns it into ammonia, which is used to make synthetic fertilizer. This invention is literally the reason our planet can feed 8 billion people. Without it, half the world would starve. But the Haber-Bosch process requires massive amounts of natural gas to work. Natural gas provides both the hydrogen needed for the chemical reaction and the massive heat required to run the factories. When geopolitical tensions in the Middle East cause energy prices to spike, the cost of making fertilizer skyrockets. When fertilizer becomes too expensive, farmers use less of it. When they use less fertilizer, crop yields collapse. We saw a terrifying preview of this in Sri Lanka in 2022. The government there suddenly banned synthetic fertilizers. The result was an absolute catastrophe. Rice production plummeted by half. The country went from being self-sufficient in food to facing mass starvation. The economy completely collapsed and massive riots forced the president to flee the country. So when we talk about energy prices in the Strait of Hormuz, we are not just talking about the cost of filling up your car. We are talking about the fundamental ability of the global agricultural system to feed the population. The gears of energy and the gears of food are locked together. This is why the current public discourse is so deeply concerning. Instead of having serious conversations about supply chains and energy security, the media and politicians are engaging in absurdist theater. There are literal news reports discussing kamikaze dolphins being used in warfare. This sounds like a joke, but it reflects a very real strategy of distraction. When the public is overwhelmed with bizarre, emotionally charged headlines, they lose the ability to focus on the underlying economic rot. This creates a psychological phenomenon known as normalcy bias. Normalcy bias is a mental glitch. It is what happens when your brain refuses to believe that a disaster is actually happening, because you have never experienced a disaster like it before. Imagine sitting on your couch watching television while the kitchen catches fire. Normalcy bias is the voice in your head telling you that it is probably just the oven acting up, and you should just keep watching your show. Right now, the global kitchen is on fire. Supply chains are breaking and inflation is proving extremely sticky. But less sophisticated investors are suffering from normalcy bias. They hear the official government narrative that the war is over, and they choose to believe it because it is comfortable. They keep their money in risky speculative assets, hoping the market will just keep going up forever. Contrarian investors, the smart money, operate completely differently. A contrarian is someone who looks at what the panicked herd is doing and does the exact opposite based on hard facts. Smart money does not listen to press conferences. They look at the data. They look at the fact that the United States is expanding military operations and launching strikes in the Eastern Pacific against alleged drug smugglers. This signals a massive projection of military force, but it also risks severe military overextension. Throughout history, empires have collapsed because they stretched their militaries too thin across too many conflicts. Look at the Roman Empire in its later years. They had to defend borders stretching from Britain to Syria. The cost of maintaining those armies drained the treasury, leading to massive currency debasement and hyperinflation. Or look at the British Empire after World War II. They had won the war, but the sheer cost of maintaining their global military presence completely bankrupted them. They had to rapidly decolonize and pull back their forces. When the United States tries to secure the Middle East, while simultaneously launching strikes in the Pacific, it creates a massive drain on resources. This overextension makes the entire system deeply fragile. Amidst all this military chaos, there is a fascinating development in South America. The United States has decided to allow Venezuela to begin restructuring its debt. Venezuela has to figure out how to repay $60 billion in defaulted bonds. To understand this, we need to break down what sovereign debt actually is. Sovereign debt is basically a giant credit card used by an entire country. Governments issue bonds, which are basically IOU, notes to investors to borrow money to build roads or fund social programs. But sometimes a country mismanages its economy so badly that it cannot make the monthly payments on that giant credit card. When that happens, the country defaults. Venezuela, a country sitting on the largest proven oil reserves in the entire world, completely destroyed its economy through corruption and terrible policies. They defaulted on their bonds, leaving investors holding worthless pieces of paper. Now, a debt restructuring process means the country is coming back to the table. They are asking investors to take a massive loss, maybe accepting 20 cents for every dollar they are owed just to get something back. This sounds terrible, but for a very specific type of investor, it is an incredible opportunity. There are massive financial institutions, often called vulture funds, that specialize in this exact scenario. They buy up the defaulted debt of broken countries for pennies on the dollar. Then they use intense legal pressure to force the country to pay them back at a much higher price. One of the most famous examples of this happened with Argentina. Argentina defaulted on its massive debt in 2001. It was the largest sovereign default in history at the time. An investor named Paul Singer, who runs a massive fund called Elliott Management, bought up cheap Argentine bonds. When Argentina refused to pay him back, he literally had his lawyers convince a court in the African nation of Ghana to seize a massive Argentine naval training ship that was docked there. He held a military vessel hostage until the country agreed to negotiate. This is the hidden world of distressed asset investing. It is completely ruthless and incredibly complex. While regular investors are panicking over inflation, these massive funds are looking at the $60 billion Venezuelan debt pile and calculating exactly how to extract billions in profit. It is a perfect example of how the elite financial world turns geopolitical disaster into massive financial gain. But geopolitical chaos is only half of the problem. We also have to look at the severe instability happening right inside the United States. The domestic political environment is fragmenting at a terrifying speed. We are seeing a massive rise in political extremism and a complete breakdown of civil discourse. Recent events like the shooting at the National Mall and an FAA employee making direct threats against the president are not just isolated crimes. They are symptoms of a much deeper societal sickness. When a society becomes this polarized, people stop trusting the basic institutions that hold the country together. This lack of trust bleeds directly into the financial markets. The stock market is ultimately built on confidence. If investors do not believe that the government can function or that the rule of law will be upheld, they will take their money and run. We saw a similar breakdown in societal trust in America back in 1968. That year was marked by massive political assassinations, extreme riots in major cities, and deep anger over the Vietnam War. The social fabric felt like it was tearing apart. During that time, the stock market experienced massive volatility, and it kicked off a brutal bear market that lasted for years. This domestic instability puts immense pressure on the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, or the Fed, is the central bank of the United States. Think of them as the people who control the temperature of the economy. If the economy gets too hot and inflation spikes, they raise interest rates to cool things down. If the economy freezes, they lower rates to warm it up. The chairman of the Fed right now is Jerome Powell. The fact that he is still there despite intense political friction is a massive story. Historically, the Fed is supposed to be completely independent from politics. They are supposed to make decisions based purely on math and economic data, not on who is trying to win the next election. But politicians hate this. They always want the Fed to lower interest rates right before an election to make the economy look good, even if it causes massive inflation later. One of the most famous examples of this happened in the 1970s. President Richard Nixon was desperate to win re-election. He put immense pressure on the Fed chairman at the time, a man named Arthur Burns, to keep interest rates artificially low. Burns caved to the political pressure. The result was an absolute catastrophe. It sparked a massive wave of inflation that destroyed the purchasing power of the American middle class. For an entire decade, it was not until a new Fed chairman named Paul Volcker came along in 1979 that the problem was solved. Volcker had absolute steel in his veins. He ignored all the political screaming and raised interest rates to almost 20%. It caused a brutal recession, but it finally killed the inflation monster. Right now, investors are watching Jerome Powell like hawks. They are trying to figure out if he will act like Arthur Burns and cave to the political pressure, or if he will act like Paul Volcker and protect the currency. The uncertainty surrounding this is driving massive anxiety in the markets. We can actually measure this anxiety using something called the VIX index. The VIX is often called the fear gauge of the stock market. Think of it like a heart rate monitor for the global economy. When the market is calm and happy, the VIX is low, usually around 12 or 13. But when fear takes over and investors start panicking, the VIX spikes. Right now, the VIX has shot up to 22.8. This tells us definitively that institutional investors are extremely nervous. They are buying massive amounts of insurance to protect their portfolios against a sudden crash. So how does the smart money actually protect itself? In an environment where global supply chains are breaking, energy prices are surging, and domestic politics are completely chaotic, they use a strategy called the asset allocation seesaw. Imagine a playground seesaw. On one side, you have risky assets like high-growth technology stocks. On the other side, you have safe defensive assets. Right now, the smart money is pushing all their weight onto the defensive side. They are specifically targeting non-cyclical sectors. A cyclical business is a business that relies on the economy doing well. For example, a company that builds luxury cruise ships is highly cyclical. When people have extra money, they take cruises. When they lose their jobs, the cruise ship company goes bankrupt. A non-cyclical business is a business that provides things people absolutely have to buy, no matter what is happening in the world. Smart investors are pouring money into utilities. Think about it. Even if there is a massive global recession and the stock market crashes, you are still going to turn on your lights. You are still going to heat your home. Utility companies have incredibly stable revenue streams, and they pay reliable dividends. Another massive target is consumer staples. These are companies that make toothpaste, toilet paper, and basic food items. People do not stop brushing their teeth during a geopolitical crisis. Finally, they are buying into healthcare. Sickness does not care about the Strait of Hormuz or Federal Reserve policy. People will always need medicine and medical care. Beyond these defensive stock sectors, smart money is also hoarding traditional safe haven assets. They are buying gold. Gold has been the ultimate form of financial insurance. For over 5,000 years, it cannot be printed by a central bank, and it does not carry the risk of a government defaulting on its debt. When inflation spikes and currencies lose their value, gold historically maintains its purchasing power. Investors are also parking massive amounts of cash in short duration, United States Treasury bonds. These are essentially short-term loans to the U.S. government that pay a guaranteed interest rate. They provide extreme liquidity, meaning you can get your cash back very quickly. If you see an opportunity to buy stocks at a massive discount during a crash, the most important survival mechanic in this chaotic environment is a strategy called dollar cost averaging. This is the ultimate tool for controlling your own psychology. Human beings are terrible at investing because we are emotional creatures. When the market is booming, we get greedy and buy at the very top. When the market crashes, we get terrified and sell at the very bottom. Dollar cost averaging completely eliminates this emotional roller coaster. Here's how it works. Instead of taking a giant lump sum of money and trying to guess the perfect day to invest it, you simply invest a fixed amount of money on the exact same day every single month, regardless of what the market is doing. Let us say you invest $500 every month into a basic stock market fund. When the market is really high, your $500 buys fewer shares. When the market crashes and everyone else is panicking, your $500 automatically buys a massive number of shares at a steep discount. Over time, this strategy mathematically smooths out the purchase price of your assets and guarantees that you are consistently buying when fear is highest. History shows us time and time again that markets eventually recover from massive geopolitical shocks. We survived the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the world was literally days away from global nuclear war. We survived the oil shocks of the 1970s. We survived the extreme inflation and the political assassinations. The global economy is an incredibly resilient organism. The companies that provide real value, that innovate, and that solve human problems will continue to grow over the long term. The goal right now is not to panic. The goal is not to sell everything and hide under the bed. The goal is to survive the current turbulence without taking catastrophic losses, so that your capital is intact when the dust finally settles and the next massive growth cycle begins. In the tempest of political and economic uncertainty, true insight lies not in predicting the exact day the next shock will hit. It lies in building a portfolio that is essentially bulletproof. It lies in maintaining absolute emotional discipline. When everyone else is losing their minds, patience and a well-crafted strategy are the ultimate antidotes to chaos. We couldn't fit all the deep dive details and practical strategies into this video. Check out the Warm Insight newsletter in the pinned comment and description for the full text summary. Visit www.warminsight.com. See you there.